Hey, Mike from Prep Pros here, and for those of you who don't already know me, I've been a full-time tutor for a little bit over 8 years now. I've scored perfectly on the SAT myself. I've published what I think is by far the best SAT math book out there. I've helped students score perfectly, and just this past spring, I had a handful of my students score 1550 plus, including this one student who got a 1580 just using my online SAT course. So I know a thing or two when it comes to doing well on the SAT, and in this video, we're going to help you quickly improve your score for the August SAT and cover 10 things you absolutely need to know. Now, the first concept you're 100% going to see in August is lines. You'll typically see a handful of these questions, but we're going to take a look at a new variety that has been giving tons of students trouble so far in 2023. Here we see line k has a slope of -4/5 and an x-intercept of r over 2, 0, where r is a constant. What is the y-coordinate of the y-intercept of line k in terms of r? Now what we always want to think about is anytime we're given the slope, we simply can always solve for the y-intercept by going ahead and plugging the slope in, and we're just simply going to write plus b because it's y equals mx plus b. Now whether they give you an x-intercept or any point on the line, this always gives us x and y values we can plug in so we can solve for b. So we simply have to plug in 0 for y, and we're going to plug in r over 2 for x, and now we can solve for b. So we'll get 0 equals -4r over 10 plus b. So we add that over. We'll get 4r plus 10, 4r over 10, is equal to b. And well, that just simplifies down to 2r over 5, and that's how we can find our correct answer. Now, the next concept you're 100% going to see on the test is what we think of as interpreting constants. And this gives so many students trouble that I have basically 2 chapters dedicated to these types of questions. So in the system of equations above, k is a constant. If the system has no solutions, what is the value of k? Well, what you need to understand for the SAT is what you're looking for the 3 different variations of these questions. No solutions simply means our slopes are the same and our intercepts are different. Infinite solutions means the lines are absolutely identical, and for one solution, your only requirement is the slopes must be different. So in this instance, for no solutions, we know the slopes must be the same, the intercepts must be different. Well, the intercepts are already different, so we just simply need to set the slopes equal to each other. So we can simply solve for k by doing 3 over 2 is equal to k over 3. We can cross multiply, and that gives us that 9 is equal to 2k. Therefore, 9 over 2, which is also the same as 4.5, is equal to k. You just need to know what you're looking for, and you can start to pick these questions up really easily. Now up next are percent increases and decreases. These show up in all sorts of different forms on the SAT, but we're going to take a look at these 2 to really teach the basic concept. So we're going to start with 24. In 1976, there are approximately 1,000 gray wolves in northern Minnesota. The number of gray wolves in northern Minnesota in 2008 was 190% greater than in 1976. Approximately how many gray wolves were in Minnesota in 2008? Now, the basic principle that the SAT loves to play around with is for percent increases and decreases, it's always 1 plus or minus the percent expressed is basically a decimal. So for a really simple example, if we're doing a 70% increase, that would be expressed by 1.7, 1 plus 0.7. 70% decrease would be the same as 0.3. So if we're showing an 190% increase, this is going to be the same as 1 plus 1.9. 1 is always equal to 100%, so 190% greater is 1.9. That's going to give us 2.9. Now this simply means we're going to take our 2.9 and multiply it by 1,000, and that will give us our correct answer of C. So as we come up to a very hard version of this, the population of a city in 2000 was 2.6 times the population in 1999. The population increased by p% from 1999 to 2000. Well, we're essentially just reversing the process that we did here. If we were told that the number of wolves was 2.9 times greater, we would be able to see that's an 190% increase because we simply would be taking away that 1 that we're always adding or subtracting to. So here we can solve for this by doing 2.6 minus 1 equals 1.6. That's going to be our amount of increase that we've done. Well, 1.6 is going to be the same as 160%, and that's how we can solve these. Up next are quadratics, and this is one of the most commonly tested concepts on the SAT, and there's all sorts of different questions you need to understand. You need to know your discriminant rules, sum of solutions, your vertex questions that we'll cover kind of here, also quadratic formula questions, maximums, minimums, multiplicity. I'm not going to run through all of that here because it's all taught in depth in my free trial, and we'll also let you check out a chapter of my math book. But let's solve question 30 from the May 2023 test. For the quadratic function h, the table gives 3 values of x and their corresponding values of h of x. At what value of x does h reach its minimum? Well, I'm going to pop on a screen a page from my book here because the principle that this question is testing you on is understanding that the vertex is the midpoint of your x-intercepts. Parabolas are symmetrical in both directions, so the midpoint of those x-intercepts always gives you your vertex. So all we need to do is we need to understand, well, h of x is the same as y. We find our x-intercepts when y equals 0, so that means we have x-intercepts of 2 and 4. Now, if the minimum part tripped you up, your minimums and maximums are always found at your vertex as well. So we simply are taking the midpoint of 2 and 4, and that gives us our correct answer here. All right, up next is exponents. These show up every single SAT, and they are often some of the most difficult questions that you'll see on the test. And the most important rule that every student forgets that they need to refresh on is the fractional power rule. That's what a ton of these revolve around. So here we see two numbers a and b are each greater than 0. And the square root of a is equal to the cube root of b. For what value of x is a to the 2x minus 1 equal to b? So let's go ahead and write this out. So we know the square root of a is equal to the cube root of b. Now we're saying a to the 2x minus 1 is equal to b. So what we want to do is we want to get this expression here equal to b. Well, first thing I want to do is use fraction powers because this will make our life a little bit easier. So we can rewrite this as a to the 1/2 equals b to the 1/3. Well, if we want to get it equal to b, we need to raise both of these sides to the 3rd power. Now that's going to give us a to the 3/2 is equal to b. Well, now since we know that a to the 2x minus 1 also equals b, we can simply set those two equal to each other. A to the 2x minus 1 is going to be equal to a to the 3/2. Now we can cancel out our bases, and we simply get 2x minus 1 is equal to 3 over 2. Well, we can add the 1 over, so we'll get 2x equals, and 1 is going to be the same as 2 over 2, equals 5/2. Now we divide both sides by 2, and we'll get our correct answer of x equals 5/4. Now for grammar, one of the things you're definitely going to see in the writing and language questions are questions on what is called parallel structure. And particularly, we have been seeing a lot of what are called illogical comparisons in the last year. Anytime you see comparisons, you really simply need to compare apples to apples. So here we see these results suggest that the red-orange glow of deep water corals might indeed be a symbiotic survival mechanism, just like those of corals in shallow waters. Now, if you ever see like those of, that of, this almost always tells you it's a parallel or kind of illogical comparison question. And those of is a plural comparison, that of is a singular comparison. Well, what we're comparing is the red-orange glow of deep water corals might indeed be a symbiotic survival mechanism, just like we have to be comparing it to another glow. And that's why we'd have to say the sun-blocking glow of corals in shallow waters. We're now comparing those apples to apples, glow to glow. Those of would be wrong because this is plural. If this said that of, that could be a correct answer, but that's what you're looking for with these very tricky comparison questions. Up next is sentence structure rules, and this is one of the most important and fundamental rules for you to understand to score really highly on writing and language. This is how we connect the different types of clauses. So we always know we're dealing with sentence structure if we see commas in fanboys, semicolons, or periods in the answer choices. So let's just take a look at our clauses. However, many consumers are concerned about the trustworthiness of anonymous customer appraisals or are simply overwhelmed by the countless often conflicting reviews. Independent clause. There is growing demand for the objective, reputable reviews provided by a professional reviewing service. Also an independent clause. So I need period, semicolon, or comma in fanboys. Well, here's the S in our fanboys, and our clauses have stayed the same, so I know that C must be correct. Now, this is your kind of trap answer when you do not. Now that, we have removed our independent clause here. Now, if these are rules you aren't familiar with and you want to learn some of the important comma rules, definitely check out my free trial. It's going to help you out a bunch for the writing and language section. Now, up next is apostrophes. Almost every single SAT, you typically will see 2 of these questions, and so many students miss them, but they're quite easy to learn. So as Abigail Derby Lewis, one of the studies ecologists, says, So now what I always like to think about is start with possessive versus non-possessive. If we're using the apostrophes, we're showing possession of the object. Well, the ecologists are not possessing the says. We can't say like the says of the ecologist. That makes no sense. So at this point, I can strike every answer that uses an apostrophe there. I can get rid of A, I can get rid of C. Well, now the main difference between B and D is, well, are we saying the studies are showing possession of the ecologists, or are we not showing possession? Well, they are the ecologists of the study, therefore I know we have to be showing possession. Now occasionally we'll also get this kind of other apostrophe here. If you see an apostrophe after the S on the SAT, that's showing plural possession. In this instance, it would be a little unclear to the reader whether this would be singular or plural possession. That's why they only give us the option of singular possession for B here. Now let's talk a little bit about the reading section here. One type of kind of reading piece of evidence that gives tons of students trouble is what I call inverse evidence. This most commonly shows up in your two natural science passages. So let's take a look at the evidence and see if we can figure this out. Information about woodpeckers' finches' social system can shed some light on the reasons for the strong genetic predetermination of tool use in the species. For one thing, in contrast to socially living primates, woodpecker finches are solitary and thus parents are likely to be only available tool-using models. Well, the question is, the passage most strongly suggests that social system of primates allows for young animals to blank. Well, this tells us, in contrast to socially living primates, woodpecker finches are solitary and thus parents are the only available tool-using models. So therefore, primates are going to be inverse of this. They're not going to be solitary and they're going to have more available tool-using models than just parents. And so that's how we can see that A is our correct answer. But being aware of this type of inverse evidence makes a huge difference for some of the most missed and difficult questions on the reading section. Now, the last thing you're definitely going to see are statistics questions. These are about standard deviation, margin of error, sampling bias, box and whisker plots show up every single SAT. But this is one that they really love to put pretty late on the test, but it's really easy if you know the trick. So here we see Micha and Rana each selected a random sample of students at their school and asked how many soft drink servings each student had consumed the previous week. Micha estimated that the mean number of soft drink servings was 7.1 with an associated margin of error of 1.2. Rana estimated that the mean number of soft drink servings was 8.3 with an associated margin of error of 0.8. Assuming the margin of errors were calculated in the same way, which of the following best explains why Rana obtained a smaller margin of error than Micha? Well, the simple principle you have to understand is the bigger part of a population we sample, the more accurate we should be, therefore we should have a lower margin of error. So just simply remember, bigger sample size gives you a smaller margin of error, smaller sample size gives you a bigger margin of error. So simply here, we know that Rana's sample must have contained more students than Micha's sample. Now, I really hope this video has helped you out. Here you can check out a math video to help you learn some of the most important concepts for the SAT. But if you're really looking to improve your score and get as high a score as possible, I recommend picking up a copy of my math book from Amazon or signing up for my Ultimate SAT course, where I'm going to teach you everything, all the strategies, tips, and tricks that have helped students improve their score by as much as 300 points and score as high as 1580 so far this year. That's all also backed by a really simple 100-point score improvement guarantee. Now, if you are in the last week or two and you're really just trying to cram in the most important topics, tips, and tricks and strategies to quickly increase your score on the SAT, I recommend taking a look at my SAT crash course. I've had students improve by as much as 160 points just from that alone. But otherwise, if you guys have any questions at all, drop them in the comments.